Well, good morning and welcome to Tampa Home Talk. This is our last February edition of 2023, and if you've been listening or watching to any of the promotions we have coming, we were supposed to have Mike Fasano in the house with us today, but he had to reschedule for the 10th. So
that's next Friday.
Well, no, a couple Fridays from now, yeah. So the PSA, what I want to give you guys, because he's not in the house this particular week, we have...
Homestead filing?
Well, your name, Leo.
Oh! I thought you were
jump the gun. Okay, go ahead.
So we had Mike Fasano on the air to talk about your homestead filing, which is due March 1st.
It's due March 1st.
It's due March 1st.
That's the PSA, and that's Leo.
Yeah. So this is Leo Kane with Beryl Engineering and Inspection, reminding you that you need to file for your homestead exemption.
This is his first day on the radio job. He didn't get how it goes down. But
I forgot to introduce myself.
Yeah, that's you. And Adam's in the house, and
I'm here. I'm Tally Insurance. It's good to be back.
Danielle
Evans with Gateway Appraisal Services.
I always love having her in here, because the real estate. Well, I can't take that back. Let me rephrase what I'm going to say, and we'll get into the numbers. So usually real estate agents and appraisers have this love-hate relationship, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You guys hate us. We love you. You
love us when we're going your way.
No, I speak your language. Yeah. I think I'm different, right?
Absolutely.
So, and I have those hard conversations usually with owners on where their houses need to be priced, especially right now in this market that's shifting up a little bit. Yep. Appraisers see that backlog of data. Most agents are really unrealistic and optimistic on the price.
Yes.
So it makes your world a little interesting, but
absolutely.
I think you're going to love today's show too, and you can chime in on it. We're going to go through the numbers with all the data for last week like we normally do. We're going to blow through the January data real quick if you want to have a peek at that, Leo. I've looked at it, but you can look at what strikes you. And then more importantly, I just got back from Keller Williams Family Reunion, which is our big annual conference where Gary Keller does his vision speech, and he goes over a whole bunch of historical data and numbers, and really just he kind of paints the story of how history may or may not repeat itself. It shows different chains of events. It's an interesting time, and I've been in this for a long time, but he's been in it longer than me. So since 1983, he has done real estate, and he happens to own the biggest real estate franchise in the world. So we have presence in all sorts of other big presence in Canada, big presence all over the world, really. And so I always like to get his take, and I like to look at some of these historic trends, and I think Leo will love this too. That's why I brought it. You know how he's all about. He geeks out with the numbers and the data and the crafts. We're
technically making history here in Tampa Bay.
We are, and we're going to talk about that. Before we do, let's get into this week's numbers. You want the honor, Adam? You want to jump in and into the numbers of the week?
Sure. No problem. New listing, 632. I feel like that seems a little low, right? Or is that an uptick? I haven't been here in a couple weeks.
My eyeballs go. I look at new listing, sold pending. New listing, sold pending. That's kind of the way my eyes roll.
Right.
Because when I look at the number of new listings at 632 and I look at the number of sold listings at 683, it tells me we're still a very strong market.
Very strong. And
then our pendings, this is wild how...
1,016?
Yeah, 1,016, how big it is compared to the other numbers. But the closings the sold is what gets to the finish line.
Right.
Right? Still very few expired, 29, canceled. Pretty small, but you got to think a lot of people have super low rates. They may not be willing to let the house go for what a buyer's willing to pay with a 3% interest rate.
Right.
Especially when they're going to be turning around and buying in a much higher interest rate and the values being higher.
Exactly.
And new construction is still booming and the prices are still steadily rising in new construction, and it's odd compared to the rest of the
It is. Okay. And so I think once we start rolling into April, in summer times, we're going to get a really good indicator on what the normal of the market is.
Yeah.
Because remember, the market started shifting in April. We call that on the air. We watch these numbers every week.
Yeah, we shifted in April, and then the recession started in July.
Yep, so it'll be interesting to watch that period, right?
Yeah,
that April through July period, because these Florida Realtor data, it comes out late, right? So it'll drop, like right now, it just dropped this week for January, right? And it feels so late because we're late February, but the data is pretty amazing in there. And it also does the year-over-year comparison. You want to dive into some of those numbers, Leo?
I mean... Nothing on this sheet is surprising. Nothing on this sheet is surprising at all for the year over year, looking at January to January. I'm kind of curious. I want to take this back to you said you had the Keller retreat.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I know nationally they're talking about this is the lowest level of buyer confidence we've had in the past 30 years.
So the interesting thing is that so we went from our local numbers to now diving into the Florida Realtor numbers for January, and then we're going to look at some national numbers. There's some really good information in here we're going to dive a little bit in depth to. And so I think we're a little bit insulated in this Tampa, Florida market.
I kind of feel that way too. I feel like Florida's come out of its skin for sure.
We're no longer as affordable as we were.
We're not affordable.
We're not affordable. I'm looking at these numbers, and these numbers tell a different story than you guys are telling right now.
So let's talk about it. Let's jump into it and see what you say. And keep in mind, let's just paint the whole picture, right? This was January. Okay, this is January's numbers of last year compared to this year. We were in one of the strongest markets we have ever seen.
Was it just our numbers were up, or was it our value was up?
The values were up because if you remember, that's when the rates first started hiking.
Yep.
Because everybody that was paying attention knew that they could get locked in right now.
Yep.
At that low 2-3% rate, and the rates were going up. So that sparked it. Because think about it, if you're paying $10,000 or $20,000 above list price, even if it's already high, does it really matter if you're taking a mortgage? If you're going to save tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars if the price point's big enough on interest over the long haul?
Yeah, but this second page would contradict that because we have a minus 50% on cash sales.
Remember cash. Their cash is not. They're waiting on the sidelines. I think cash buyers are waiting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
And there's dive into that data, Leo, because it's fascinating. There's a lot of information there.
Closed sales down 30% year over year.
But again, we're talking about January that just passed compared to the strongest January we've had since literally 06.
History.
Yeah,
really.
Year over year, down 30%. Other jump outs at me. If you look at the median sale price, you can actually see as the rate increases started basically in August of last year, you can see sharp changes for the median sale price.
Absolutely.
The median sale price started that differential. So the median is if you had like 10 ducks in a row, you just grab the fifth duck. So the median sale price would be not the average, but
the middle
price. And the year-over-year change, though, we had these strong, like year-over-year, 20%, 30% increases in home values. Year-over-year, January to January, you're looking at 4%.
Which is not horrible. So let's talk about that.
I mean, it could be negative.
Well, in this national data that we're going to look at, and you might, if you want these slides, you can call or text us. We'll get them to you. 813-377-2775. They're pretty fascinating. 813-377-2775. Back to your point, Leo, and then kind of run through those numbers if you could, like January through December. Our historical average in Tampa Bay in terms of appreciation year over year is 5 to 7%. So when you look at the sharpest month, really, in January, I'd say January, February, March, were some of the sharpest months we're going to see. And you look at that year over year, and the fact that we still have a 4% increase is pretty good.
It's pretty good, and especially like for Florida. We're looking at the national numbers.
Well, these are Tampa. These are Tampa specific.
But
seeing the differences.
See this trend, though. I mean, okay, 30%, 30%, 30%, 30%, 30%. That's January through May. Now, July starts. That's when we triggered July 18th is when we said the recession started. Mm-hmm. We go from 30% down to 20%. Then we go from 20% by November, we're at 10%. Now we're at 4%. So according to this trend, by April, May, it could be negative.
We could be, but I don't. It'll be interesting to see.
It's tough because these are these 4 months until April are our hot months in real estate.
I want to see where this shakes out, and I think it will be very interesting. I think look at all those snowstorms and stuff that they're having up north. I mean, it's crazy. It's going to drive.
We have a lot of movement
here.
just coming from Orlando to Tampa, and just coming Sarasota and Manatee County are on fire right now.
Miami, a lot of migration.
It's Fort Myers, Naples moving up.
Yeah, well,
that's what I'm seeing.
Look at it. There's no housing.
They can't get their houses rebuilt for another year, and they're just relocating north.
either permanently or maybe they'll rent it and
I
go
have
back.
a feeling it's going to be permanent because we have that hurricane, we just don't get
That
touched.
protection,
Yeah. So I think
At least that's the
myth.
Yeah, the fable.
Yeah, there's other data. I'd love to jump in on this. Like I know we're heading to break, so 813-377-2775, 813-377-2775. When we come back, I want to jump in this median time to contract. This is amazing when you look at this data and when you look at median time to sale, and that stuff we should talk about after the break.
Yep.
813-377-2775. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And welcome home. This is Leo Kane with Beryl Engineering and Inspection, talking about your monthly market detail for not just Florida, for January 2023.
And this is the Tampa Bay region.
The Tampa Bay region, which includes Hernando, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough.
Yeah, Florida Realtors does a bang-up job, really, on these reports. My only complaint would be I wish we got the data sooner. And I know it takes a long time to compile all of this.
This is a lot of data to compile.
I know, but I feel like we should have it within 10 days after the month closes.
It takes a lot of time to put together an Excel spreadsheet with a bar graph.
They should have that nailed by this point, I would think.
I feel like an intern could get that done. And
where are my pie charts? Where are my pie charts?
Definitely need
You got graphs. Isn't that good enough?
That's good enough. So two of the things I really wanted to talk about was median time to contract and median time to sale. So median time to contract, that's when we're talking about what's our inventory? How fast is it? We were talking about this time in January of last year, we had less than a month of inventory.
Well, median time to contract is when that property lists, when it launches on the market, to the day you get an agreement signed by a buyer.
9
That's
days.
median time to contract.
9 days last January. Guess how many now?
40.
Close?
Nah.
Yeah, almost 40.
45.
Is it 40?
It's
40 to
35.
45, yeah.
Well, you know where that gap is. The unrealistic sellers. I don't think it's 40 because are not.
I see it. I see it, and this is where I see it on my side. We're seeing 2 appraisals be done and lenders stealing from, and that's causing a little bit of time.
I'm seeing more appraisers.
I work with one specific bank that I literally come in the 99th hour and I take that loan and I walk because their rate is better than anybody else, and I literally they already have it clear to close with somebody else, and this credit union's coming in and taking it.
It's just amazing when I look at the data. When you look at all this data, you see the pivot points, and you see it's all in July of 2022. Mm-hmm. It's all in July. It was going in before July, it was less than 7 days. Once July hit, you went to 14 days, and now it's at 35 days.
And a lot of that has to do with lending restrictions as well. Lending restrictions tightening. Taking longer
the lending
to get to the closing
Let's just
table.
talk about that for a second. That's not the only thing, but literally, if Sarah was on, and there's a really cool thing I would love for her to chime in and talk about. I text her, but I don't know if she will. So if she doesn't, I'll talk about it. But anyway, they basically run it through an automated underwriting system. So that means they put all the data in. The computer spits out an accept or a refer, which is a denial, and we're seeing tighter credit score requirements, just much tighter things. This is not. That's why when people say, "Oh my gosh, it's gonna be like 2008 where the market crashes," no, it's not.
No, it's not.
The lending standards got tighter after COVID. They never really restricted.
Let up.
And as a matter of fact, they're tighter, especially on investor loans and different things like that. It's tighter than I've seen it.
Multifamily is almost next to impossible to lend on right now.
20% down. I mean,
let's flip that for a second. So 2008. We had the crash, no buyer confidence, everything you can't buy a property because you can't get lending, and if you have a property, it's being heavily devalued. We're 50% that right now. We're not losing the property value, but it's harder to get money.
Yes.
It's harder to find a home. There are less homes available.
We're still at a 4-month absorption rate.
Yeah, so harder to find a home, harder to get money. We still have less transactions happening. The only difference between 2008 and right now is if you own a home, you're not in danger of losing a bunch of value.
No. And the rent is up.
Rent is up.
Yeah, see, they're saying our absorption rate is 2.1, but that's 4 counties, and that's January numbers.
Yeah, 2.1
I think realistically, Tampa Bay proper, we're a little bit closer to that 4% absorption rate, 4-month absorption rate.
Yeah, so
Inventory is still tight.
Inventory is tight. I mean, look at these numbers, and the difference between '08 and right now, the only difference is if I'm an actual home owner, I'm not worried about losing a bunch of value.
You're not. So that's why I say
that's the difference.
There's a lot of buyers on the sidelines that are waiting because they think some big crash is going to happen. And I've got news for you. It's not.
I don't think we're going to have a crash. I just think we're going to have a stall. I mean, I have a house that's worth $200,000 today. It's worth $208,000 tomorrow. That's it.
Yeah.
And that tomorrow is like 6 months from now. So to that aspect, in '08, it was like all these foreclosures were happening. When you have all those foreclosures and you can go to the courthouse steps, and now you can buy that $200,000 home for $30,000.
Yeah, we're not.
That's not where we're at.
Yeah.
No.
And that's the difference.
Well, it shows on there the distressed property. So foreclosures and short sales are almost nil. There's almost nothing there. And so all of that plays a part in the market. So, I mean, here's what I tell sellers, in the most basic terms, right? Because I do this every day for a living, and I understand the data. I can go as deep as someone wants to do it. But in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, when I explain to a seller, and this is where your absorption rate and your market and your buyers and all this stuff plays a part, I tell people, okay, you've got this house. Our median price in Tampa, by the way, is right at $400,000. Okay, so let's say you got this house, and to you, this house you're living in is worth $425,000, right? Yep. It's worth $425,000 to you as the homeowner, you as the seller, and then you put it on the open market, and you get a buyer that says, "I'm going to give you $400,000 for it."
Yep.
Okay. The difference is it's what it's worth to the seller compared to what it's worth to the buyer. So if you're not willing to make that budge, or you guys are not willing to meet somewhere in the middle, you still own it for $425,000, the value that you put on it, and the buyer is saying, I'm going to wait till I can find something that I see the value in.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a simple way to look at it. And with the absorption rate still being so low, it matters because we're still seeing really strong. We're still seeing multiple offers on properties that are priced appropriately.
Yeah.
Even, in some areas that, quite frankly, I am scared to go by myself. I mean, I've got a listing in one of those areas, and it's like, but we have multiple offers on it. It's, it's taking a little longer to get that. Mm-hmm. But if it's priced
and
appropriately.
waterfront properties are at a snail's pace right now. You go up to Hernando Beach, you go into, North Newport Richey, Port Richey, Hudson. Everything on the water up there is looking hundreds of days to sell. And nobody can understand why. And I'm trying to explain to them that the insurance, and it's the lack of ability to even get insurance.
I think their bigger problem in the state.
It's not the ability, it's the price. So
some of these houses don't even qualify.
So like the Newport Richey, right? Let's just hit that because that's a big problem area. You're probably only with Citizens because A, you're in Pasco, right?
Which nobody likes.
Nobody likes Pasco, and B, if you're in Newport Richey on the water, your home was probably built in the 70s or the 80s.
And UPC just went under.
Or older,
right? So then you're only with Citizens. Flood is obviously going to be required by your lender, but the new thing with Citizens is the flood coverage either has to match what you have on your homeowner's policy, or it has to be at the max, which is $250 and $100, right? So what's happening is and we have a bunch of non-renewals coming up with Citizens that we have to adjust their flood policy.
If you get a $500,000 house, they want you to max out that flood policy for
$250, $100, yeah. Which, if you're in Pasco County, right? If you're in Newport Richey on the water, some of those flood policies are $5,000, $6,000. Right?
Yeah, I think some of that's absurd because I look at what it would cost to actually go in and redo that, right? You might have floors and drywall. Not redo the whole thing, but just to repair what's there if you had a flood.
Well, it reflects risk.
Well, then the FEMA 50% rule,
risk.
And the FEMA 50% rule comes in and applies when you are trying to improve a hurricane damaged home.
Well, I mean, if you've got water up to the kitchen island, sure.
So
but
the FEMA 50% rule basically says that if you take a look at the property appraiser website and you look at your building value, you can only do 50% of that value in construction to your house.
That value?
Or you can have an appraisal ordered, a private appraisal, and the county will accept. I do these appraisals all the time.
Slow down and re-explain because I think this is an important
It's very
point
important.
for
It's
people
extremely
listening.
important.
Go to the property appraiser's site. This is how you can
Choose some numbers.
This is the easy way to do it.
So you have a $300,000 property.
Per the property appraiser.
Per property appraiser. 100,000 of that is land. Mm-hmm. So that gives you 200,000 on the building. And the FEMA 50 rule, technical bulletin 8, says that 50% of that's your max construction.
So 100,000.
100,000 that you can do the construction on before you trigger having to upgrade your home to current floodplain.
And rebuild.
Yes. And rebuild. Now, here's where it gets tricky. If you have this older home, like Danielle's explaining, 1970s, things like that, what's going to happen is you're going to have that $300,000 property, but your home's going to be like $125,000, and you're really going to have between $50,000 and $60,000 for construction.
And once you need roof, windows, air conditioning, you are underwater. Your home now needs to be leveled and start over.
So Danielle,
it's a nightmare. And you can have an appraisal done to combat the assessed value and make it the true market value based on a certified appraisal. The county will
and they'll look at the land and the building.
We do the cost approach, and we find out the depreciated value of the building, and we, of course, our values are higher than assessed value because market value is higher than assessed value.
So when we come back on that, Adam, that's a good segue for you to chat about what happens if you're over that FEMA 50 rule. What are you looking at for insurance? This is a really important.
Oh, it becomes $10,000.
Well, let's let Adam dive into this because this is important. I want to know what happens if we're that example that you gave, Leo. You're 100,000 or less, right? In order to repair to stay in that FEMA 50 rule.
And it's over 5 years as well.
813-377-2775. We're going to run out of time. If you've got questions, you want to talk about that some more in depth, 813-377-2775. You can call or text. We'll be right back. 813-377-2775. This is Tampa Home Talk.
And welcome home. This is Tampa Home Talk. I'm Adam Talley with Talley Insurance. Good to be back.
Before you dive in, since I just had back-to-back commercials, Adam.
Yeah, back-to-back. Do you want another one? Back-to-back?
So this will be 10 years in radio for me and for Tampa Home Talk. And I love how my commercials say 23 years when it's really been like 32.
Well, as Patrick would tell me, you got to update your commercials.
Yeah, I need to update the commercials.
I need to update mine too.
We're working on it, but mine has a year in there. It's like all of a sudden I'm going to go from 23 to 32. I promise I'm not lying. This didn't change it every year. Anyway, so when
sounds like you're
that's
bragging.
why you don't put you don't put years and dates in there so it can be used forever, right?
Listen, I did that commercial 10 years ago when I was a real estate agent, not a radio person.
That's why you do since in the year.
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's going to sound worse.
Since established.
I've been doing stuff since 1984.
Back in my day, we had to walk to our listings uphill.
Not that old, but like 19 anything makes you sound like you're ancient. Yeah, I really don't want to do that.
I used to have to take a horse and buggy to get to my listings.
Oh, come on. No. Oh, Lord. It's hurting, Adam.
Listen,
Leo, stop it.
If your birthday was in any part of the 1990s, you're already old enough to drink.
Oh, my gosh.
I graduated from high school near that time. I don't want to talk about it. All right. Let's carry on with this.
So you were old enough to drink then?
Well, I had a fake ID then, but we're not going to talk about that.
Did you need them? I thought the legal drinking age used to be 18.
That was before my time.
Yeah,
I do remember it, but it was before my time. It used to be 18. I remember when it changed. I was a kid. Anyway.
Why'd they change it?
Because too many irresponsible do 18-year-olds.
Well, I mean, you're not that much more mature 3 years later.
So
maybe a little bit more.
They raised the drinking age and lowered the driving age.
Yes.
Gotcha.
No, that didn't change much. That was been 16 for.
What's the age? Time. What's the age to own a gun?
21.
Okay. Really?
Mm-hmm. Oh. 21. You know, a rifle, like a shotgun. Mm-hmm. But 21 for a handgun.
So what if you go into the military at 18?
Yeah, that's
you get out, but they won't let an ex, whatever.
I had an interesting conversation with a person last night around something similar to this.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
Interesting.
They can send you to war and strip you of your gun rights.
I love that for us.
Which is crazy, but it happens. Yeah, anyway. Welcome to America. So let's talk about FEMA 50 rule.
FEMA 50 rule.
We are, and then we got a bunch of that national data to dive into, which is really important.
Really, I've scoured this. This is pretty interesting.
So there's a couple slides I'm literally going to put in my presentations for buyers and sellers because I think they're fascinating. It makes sense. Before we do that, let's finish our thought on the FEMA 50 rule. So let's go back to our scenario where we talked about dirt's 100, house is 200, 100,000, right, Leo? Hypothetically speaking, is how much you have to improve the house.
On newer homes, if we're going to do realistically, you're looking at 50,000 on these older homes.
So
I'm
why-
going to use real numbers.
Wait, what's the difference?
Because the older homes, the land is usually worth more, and the house is usually worth less.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And then on top of it, to put in for these permits, sometimes it's not even feasible. They need architectural drawings.
Yes.
Then in many cases, they need an appraisal because the assessed value just does not work for them.
So
So
just to
thankfully-
put the permit in and just to put the paper in, it's thousands of dollars.
Thankfully, that doesn't calculate into the cost of the FEMA 50.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That does not.
All the soft costs don't count
Don't.
towards the number.
That's good.
That's
It's
the good.
just on the improvement. But if you buy a house that automatically needs a roof, windows, and an air conditioning, do not expect those to all be done in the same year. They will have to be spread out over year over year. I mean, they
5
won't
years,
let you-
right, is what
Yeah,
you're saying?
and then it starts over again after the 5
So,
years.
Adam, what happens if we're in this space, right? And let's say you have a true catastrophic, like what just happened down south last year. You've got water in your kitchen. Now you got to replace cabinets, flooring, drywall, all the things, right? Maybe even the air conditioner because it's not elevated. We see that.
Yeah.
So what happens if you're over that? How does your insurance policy what happens? What does it look like from an insurance perspective if you're in that scenario and you're over that 50%?
You're over the 50%, so you basically got to
So-
rebuild.
Yeah. So,
That's
and
what
so
happens.
does
raise, and
insurance
you must
pay for that?
raise.
It
Or is that an Aaron question?
that would be a good question for Aaron. It's going to depend
My-
really on the
my
situation.
opinion-
It's a limits of coverage question.
It
really.
is. My opinion is that they'd pay off the mortgage and walk away.
So we're going to have Aaron back, I think, to talk about this because this is probably an hour worth of topic that the
Yeah.
insurance guy doesn't want to answer, I'm sure.
Well,
it's
you know,
really better served for an attorney like Aaron.
What I would tell you to be as safe as you can possibly be if you are in a flood zone or something like that where it's a possibility, especially if you're in an older home, right? The older the home, the more important this is. Newer homes, less likely because it's newer, it just costs more anyways, and it's probably already
The code is right.
The
probably
Spencer,
already
yeah.
built up.
Correct.
But I would 100% make sure that you have as much ordinance and law coverage as you can.
Okay.
Right, because what that does, ordinance and law is coverage above and beyond that dwelling limit.
So what's the
right?
ordinance and law coverage on the one you were quoting me, Adam?
Probably 25%.
Okay, we have to break that
You do
down.
25 or 50. So it's based off of your dwelling limit, right? So if your dwelling limit's 200, 25% would be an additional $50,000
To
on
build-
top
to
of it.
rebuild.
To rebuild,
Oof,
right?
okay.
And that's just to bring it up to code.
How high do they let you do that?
Depends on the carrier, 50%.
Okay.
Now you pay for it. That's the other problem.
How much is that going to cost?
Depends
Is
on
it
the
doubling
carrier.
the premium?
No, not necessarily. It depends on the carrier.
25%?
Depends on the carrier.
Okay, I know.
Right. That's not just. It
That's
depends on the
getting
carrier.
an
Depends
easier
on
and
the
easier
house.
question to answer every week.
Right.
Depends on the carrier.
Depends
All
on the
right,
carrier.
so
Less and less of
It
them.
depends on who's left, right?
So let's dive into these numbers, okay? So I'm going to go over the numbers from Gary Keller's most recent vision speech. He does a vision speech, which is where he thinks the real estate market's going, where we've been, how that trends over time. We look at a lot of data since like 1990s. He'll comparatively look at all of this, and then he'll talk about, the state of the company. How is Keller Williams doing compared to other folks? So one of the things, he opens up the speech with the numbers that drive the U.S. real estate market. And he does the same thing for Canada, but which we're obviously not going to talk about because, the U.S. is where
What?
the show
Yeah?
is. Yeah, I've got the data if you want it. So the numbers that drive the U.S. economy for real estate, home sales, obviously right on the top, home prices, total market volume, how much is selling, right? So 4 homes at $250 is $1 million worth of volume. Inventory, how much is available for sale? Mortgage rates, that's a big topic this year. The treasury spread. We don't talk about that enough. I'll talk about
What is
that in
the
a
treasury
second.
spread?
I'll tell you. And then affordability is the last one. So the treasury spread is basically, think about it like this, in the most simplest terms I can explain it, it's what banks buy money for at the Federal Reserve. So when you look at what they buy money for and what they relend it for, that's your treasury spread in essence. And so banks have been over by a pretty large amount that treasury spread, and you can see that in some of these numbers, and we'll chat about this. So one of the first things that they talk about is home prices, and they talk about it on an annual level. And then the really important part, Leo, and you'll love this, they show this trend line. See this trend line? That's your normal appreciation for real estate. And it goes all the way back to 1990, which sounds right because I bought my home in the 90s. And this is national.
But you bought
data.
your house before you could drink and before you can have a gun?
We're not going, no. Actually, maybe. Not exactly. It was all around the same time. $94,000 in 1990 was the median home price in the U.S., okay? And you follow this trend line, and it's interesting. You can see here around 2002 when we're a little bit above that trend line, a little bit more above the trend line in 03, a little bit more above the trend line in 04, big time in 05 and 06, which was the peak, and then you can see where it starts to fall off. And then you literally have, what we call this overcorrection, right? So it took literally till 2011 to clean out all of this backlog of these bad mortgages.
It was 2011? I thought it was 2013.
There's still some on the books. No, look at it. So your trend line right here, 2011 is when it starts to level off.
No, that's the bottom was 2011. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when the bottom was really I think 08 was really, but then a lot of your investors start coming in the market around this time. And then a lot of your regular buyers, think about it, that's right for the time frame because you got about a 5-year spread.
Yeah.
So some of these buyers are re-entering the market around 2012.
So my big takeaway looking at this graph from a distance is in the 04 to 06, we're above this trend line.
Yes.
By 20%.
21.
And right now,
we're only
2021 through 2023, we're still above the trend line.
Not by much.
We're
by
still
12%.
above. The
yes.
2 times we're above.
That's right.
Both were followed by a dip.
Yeah. Well, this is extreme. I think this right here, what we saw in history was extreme.
That was predatory lending.
Correct, because of what happened here. So I definitely agree, and I've said this since the beginning, we're going to see a dip. We're in the dip. We're seeing the dip right now.
The PMI, the difference with PMI and the difference with lending is really actually technically working.
So this is the one point I was going to talk about because Sarah's not here to share, but FHA as of this month is reducing their PMI factor. What does that mean? That's the percentage in which it costs to get private mortgage insurance, which so if you don't put 20% down, you have to have it. It protects the bank against default. And basically they're chopping that like in half. So it's FHA loans are going to get very, very competitive. Interest rate wise, PMI wise. So don't be, if you're a seller and your house is on the market, don't be afraid to take an FHA or a VA loan. It's had a little bit of a bad stigma over the last several years. Yeah, it's
all appraised the same way.
They're chopping
the values.
The PMI factor. Yeah.
So they're reducing what you have to put down to have PMI? They're reducing what it costs for the PMI. So the factor
changes depending on your loan to value, but basically the insurance cost, it's insurance. Mm-hmm. It's insurance for the lender against default, right? Mm-hmm. That factor, the premium is going down because the market's so strong. I mean, and the other thing I think I'll see come back, and this has been this way for probably 15, 20 years since the housing collapse, on an FHA loan, they made the mortgage insurance permanent for the life of the loan, and I think we're going to see that go away in the next 5 years.
Like once you get to 20%, they'll take it off.
It used to be 78%. It was an automatic termination, and it's still that way for conventional, but they changed it permanently for FHA, and I think it's just wrong. There's too much equity right now in the market, and what's going to happen is you're going to see all these folks at a 2, 3, under 4% interest rate that are going to have a ton of equity. I mean, some of these folks are going to be 50% loan to value.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
some of them probably already are, and I think they're going to get pushed back. It's going to take someone to lobby this, right, and to push it on a legislative level, and then they'll change it back.
I'm in an FHA loan in my Cape Cod house, and that PMI is permanent for the life of the loan.
Yeah, but
I can never get that 2.9% interest rate ever again.
And so what's your LTV? What do you think your loan to value is? 50%?
The house
equity or more?
Oh, I have 70% equity in the house.
She only owes 30% compared to the value.
And I pay $103 a month for nothing.
It's going to go away. So this trend line, going back to this, that we are seeing a little bit of a dip. So it's saying nationally our trend line should be around 357. This is for the whole U.S. Okay, and I think we're a little bit insulated in Florida. We really are.
Really in Tampa Bay, I think we are.
And then this home sales annual volume. This is your trend line on what's normal. It's around 20. 27.3 million. We're right about where we should be in terms of what's moving. It's just we don't have the inventory
I
to
have
support
never
it.
appraised so many $1 million homes in my life.
I know.
And I've been doing this
So,
for 20 years.
When we come back, we're going to talk about this a little bit more about inventory, mortgage rates, the U.S. economy, how it's affected, the unemployment rates, how all these numbers play in, and also what are the staggering inflationary things that we're seeing in the market that are playing a part. This is Tampa Home Talk. We'll be right back.
Welcome home. This is the
Take us home, buddy.
Yep. Where
This is
we
the fun part.
813-377-2775. Katrina has a lot of stuff to give you in the next 5 minutes. Go, 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 go.
Something like that. All right. So home prices. We were talking about this dip in 08, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the home prices in this 5-year period from 05 to 11 was down 4.4, or 06 through 11 was down 4.40%. But when you look at these, like conservatively from 1990 to 2000, it was a 3.96, right? So 4% almost nationwide annual appreciation. Tampa Bay, I said we're 5 to 7%. We are. It's pretty normal, and I think we're going to continue to spike. And then through 01 through 05, you had an 8.88% annualized appreciation. We were negative 4% from 06 to 11. In 2012 to 2019, we were at 6.37. Remember, that was the investor years. They started flooding in the market. And then look what happened in COVID. Right after 19, from 20 to 22, 12.49% appreciation all over the U.S.
I believe it. There was a whole bunch of extra free money floating around.
Free money, people buying investment properties, not a bad thing.
Well,
right?
and I think that at that time, when COVID hit, I believe you probably had a lot of people that were renting by choice, right? COVID hits, you're getting locked down in an apartment when you could be in a house if you could afford it, and
Yeah.
I feel like you had a lot of people that went from renting to buying a house just because it's like, hey, this
don't wanna be
is an
stuck.
expensive
Yeah.
prison. I know a lot of people
Well,
that
lending
lived in Channel
restrictions.
Side
But
that moved out because
They don't wanna
they
do
can
it.
afford it and don't want to deal with a
And
lockdown at
lending
600 square
restrictions
feet.
on your income were lifted for that 2-year drop.
So let's talk about total market volume compared to agent count. That's pretty significant, right? So back in 1999, the total volume was 0.89 in terms of trillions of dollars, and the agent count was 761,000. And look what's happening to our agent count here. So it started rising a little bit in 2020, 2021 it went through the roof. So we had 2.83
Trillion?
thousand of
Thousands.
agent count.
And the worst part is for real estate appraisers,
Yeah.
hasn't moved at all.
Well, because they can't get you guys in there. That's a different story. But the agents, look how sharply that's declining. They're going down, down, down. We're seeing that.
That's normal. I mean, anyone can pick up a real estate license.
There's another, well, almost anyone, but
It's-
the barrier to entry is relatively low.
Yeah.
It's
How
like,
long
should
do
be
you think
higher.
it would take you to study to pass the real estate exam?
You passed the first time.
No, I know, but how long do you think you would have to study to pass it?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't. You think you could?
You didn't
You
read
think you could take it?
Remember, he's got like this photographic
Okay, so-
memory.
so-
You think you could take it like in 10 minutes and pass?
So here's how I already know the answer to that question is I had my wife get her license so I'd be able to do some investment stuff on the side. I helped her prepare for the test, so I already know what's in it.
and he's got it memorized.
okay.
He looks
All
at
right.
it once.
So
it's there
I already have
forever.
so it's not that difficult. I mean, if you
Did Nikki pass it the first time?
yeah.
Okay, good. Leo helped her study. I love it.
She's smart.
She's got a master's degree.
Yeah,
I mean, I wasn't
she's
expecting her
smart. She
not to
does-
pass it the first
you
time.
know.
Well, some of those homes are tricky. There's 2 right answers. One is more right. So you got to be
Yeah.
aware of all that stuff. Anyway, let's finish. Let's keep going with this. So inventory. So this is annual inventory. So look at the appreciation between 20 and 22, 12.49 average appreciation. That's way above. That's why we're going to see that dip. Because when you look at kind of like this historical trend average, we're somewhere between 6 and 8%. I think that's pretty accurate for Tampa, especially.
With inventory.
The month supply of homes. So this is 2020, 2021, and 2022. You can see that we went up with 2.9% nationwide. We're lower than that.
Let's jump to this unemployment.
Well, before we get to that, real quick, I want to talk about the rates. So the mortgage rates, this annual trend line, when you look at this and you say, okay, where is kind of the middle? It's right about that 6%.
That makes
That's
sense.
right about the middle. And then when we look at the top, what's the higher end of the middle? It's almost 8. So it's 7.81%. And you look at this, the lowest trend line was 3.80. And some people have lower mortgage rates than that are listening to the show. So when you look at like an average normal trend line, I think we're going to trail right around that 6%. I do think we're going to hit 8. I really do. I think we're going to hit close to 8. But the normal level, I think, is around that 6.
Well,
And again, that's the spread.
We dropped.
We dipped.
I mean, we had to dip because the market.
Treasury spread, remember?
Yeah.
We talked about that. Lenders have the ability, and we're going to see that. It'll be interesting how that prices, because you're going to see some lenders, if they're not meeting their volume that they need to sell, they're going to get more aggressive with their pricing to get those deals in there. It's going to be interesting. Look, there's your Treasury spread. So the banks have got about a 2.84% margin that they're making in between what they're borrowing and relending for. Affordability, this is your affordability line right here. And this percentage up here is how much of your housing is going towards how much of your income is housing. And we were about 24% nationwide on affordability.
So that doesn't count your utilities. That's just your mortgage.
Correct. Just the mortgage. So the U.S. economy, I figured you would love this, and I'll let you take this part. So the U.S. economy that drives these things and drive interest rates, you have GDP, which is gross domestic product, unemployment, personal savings rate, and inflation. So you want to dive into these?
Yeah, I mean, we look at the gross domestic product. It was interesting in 2020 when the market, we had COVID, along with 2009 when we had the market collapse. We had negative gross domestic product.
Which means people were not spending money.
But right after that, you had an influx of people spending money.
Yes.
I mean, it happened in both cases. Now in 2021,
people don't know how to save
Stimulus.
and hold on to it,
It has
right?
to
They'll
do
save,
with
they'll save the
full-time.
money
Yeah.
for like a
In
little
both
bit, and then
cases, stimulus money was we printed money and
we
handed
printed
it
money,
out.
handed it out, and
It's
then
all
we had to rise
stimulus.
we had to rise rates to keep people from doing it with their savings as opposed to with just the free money.
There's more we got to cover. Keep moving.
So that was unemployment was another one. It spiked in 2020. It then started dropping 8.1% in 2020. We were at 3.6% in 2022.
Our unemployment numbers are incredible.
Yeah, I disagree with this unemployment number nationally, though. Towards the end of 2022, the unemployment's back on the rise.
Well,
a lot
they
of
got
companies have started raising.
They got the data from the labor
I'd like to see the 2022 on a monthly scale because we all know these companies, these large companies,
Right.
were laying off.
Especially in lending and mortgage.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they're still
Appraisal
doing
management
it. And they're still
companies.
doing it.
There's a little bit more in there. So unemployment as an annualized basis.
Annualized basis, I mean, we're looking at anywhere between 5 and 8%. We're currently at 3.6%.
There's some other stuff too that really matters. So this right here, this unemployment, this shows you basically the percentage, and you can look back to like April 2020, see your huge spikes, and then it kind of levels off. Now I printed this one on here. It's unemployment layoffs per the NASDAQ, and we're running out of time, but basically all these Facebook, Google layoffs, it's a very small percentage. Real quick, savings, and let's talk about the inflation.
I like
Quick.
savings. I mean, savings, you see personal savings rate was at a record high in 2020 when you couldn't spend money. And now it's near a record low. It's back to 3.3%. People are
Craziness.
spending more money than they should be. And inflation's on the rise. Inflation's the highest it's been since
In a
the
long,
early
long,
90s.
long time. Yeah, flip again. One more. So look at this. You're going to want this. Caller text 813-377-2775. We got an inflation. What's costing the most? And rent to own. Hospitals really high. Housing and hourly wages. The lowest thing on here, TVs. It's incredible data.
Well, TVs always get cheaper over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. 813-377-2775. 813-377-2775. This is Tampa Home Talk. Love where you live, or we'll fix it. Welcome home.